happen with the British monarchy now that Charles is king? Will he be able to hold the kingdom together, or will it fall apart under the stresses of modernity? Hello everyone, welcome to Royal News Network. My name is Brittany, and today we're going to be kind of analyzing probably the next couple months to a year and what will that look like for the British royal family in terms of, their homes, jewelry, and just, the institution of the monarchy itself. How will things change, especially as Charles is going with his slimmed down monarchy? And while that is definitely going with the trend of the rest of Europe, most other European countries do not have the number of Commonwealth countries, not only a head of state that Charles is for several countries. So it is quite a unique and interesting times. And I'm just going to go over a couple things I know that we can expect and just some guesstimates on some other things that we may be able to see as well. But if you guys haven't been here before, hello, my name is Brittany, and on this channel we provide compelling royal commentary, news, and just a little bit of gossip as well. We will also review television shows, movies, and share a bit of history too. If you are interested in royal fashion, jewelry, which I am, I love it. I have a entirely separate channel that will launch in October about that called Royal Fashion News. So if you're interested in that, I will put a link in the description box down below. But before we go on to talk about Charles and kind of the changes we can see, there's just a couple little royal news updates I wanted to share with you. So number one is that Catherine and William, the Prince and Princess of Wales, went to Windsor and met with some of the volunteers who helped with the Queen's interment ceremony. So they met with them today. So go ahead and take a look at some of this video
that we are getting in. This is the Prince and Princess of Wales. They are visiting the Guildhall in Windsor. They've been meeting volunteers and operations staff who were involved in the funeral service and the committal service for the Queen. Now, the royal family have said that they weren't going to undertake official engagements this week because they're going to have a week of private mourning. But this is not what I suppose would be called an official event. It wasn't something that was in their calendar or diary.
So this was a bit of a surprise because we had been kind of told over this next week or so the royal family will finally actually kind of be able to mourn the loss of the Queen. They've been basically hitting the ground running ever since her death happened. Charles has been kind of shoring up his reign in many ways, and so this is kind of this was an unexpected visit and an unannounced visit, but I think one that was greatly appreciated. Obviously people were like right there when they arrived, so how cool would that be to be kind of hanging out there in Windsor and all of a sudden they show up. We also have Crown Princess Mary of Denmark. She is doing an event for grief, so go ahead and take a listen to some of this here.
Grief is probably one of the most trying periods one can go through. And grief is something most of us will experience during our lives. It can come suddenly, unexpectedly. It can overwhelm us to a degree where it overshadows our lives completely, at least for a while. For some, grief never loosens its grip. And yet grief is not something we talk about.
Grief is something that Mary knows personally. Her mother actually passed away in 1997 before she met her future husband, Crown Prince Frederick of Denmark. And so this is something that Mary can speak personally to, much like Prince William in this situation. So there's kind of a European council looking at grief, and I think that's a wonderful thing. We also have a couple of royals at the UN as well. Queen Letizia, I mentioned, was there yesterday. We also have Queen Maxima of the Netherlands. She is there. And then also Queen Reina of Jordan as well. But like I said, let's look at King Charles's reign. What will that look like? Even when I was sitting there just kind of briefly planning this video, I had like the whole list and it kept going and going and going of kind of what we can expect from him and how things will probably change. And obviously the first thing we're most looking forward to, or at least that's kind of me, is the coronation. There has not been a coronation in 70 years, especially the British are known for being very, very grand. And we have had a couple of coronations in Europe recently. Probably the grandest was the Dutch one, and that was the only one kind of done. It was an abdication. They have a tradition of actually abdicating the throne, and so the Queen had abdicated, her son came into power, and so they were able to have something of a very nice transition, whereas in Spain and Belgium, because of scandals, they had to have the kings in those cases abdicated. So it was more of a muted affair, it seemed like. So I am very excited for Charles to become king, but like so many other things, he's kind of narrowing and kind of minimalizing the scope of his coronation. And obviously there will be the imperial state crown involved, St. Edward's crown, the scepter, and those are all very, very grand pieces of jewelry. So we expect to enjoy seeing those things, and some of this, more of the ceremony may be televised than it was last time. But I think we'll have, again, something that's a bit more muted than expected, because when Queen Elizabeth was crowned, basically, everybody who came, they're all glittering in their diamonds and tiaras. I just don't know if we'll see that quite as much this time. And I'm a little disappointed about that, because my thing is I love tiaras, and it's kind of a bummer we just don't see them as much. Queen Elizabeth used to wear them to movie premieres and those sorts of things, so I kind of understand why. But the fun thing about these jewelry pieces is that to see them be worn, I think, is so exciting, rather than them just sitting in a vault and nobody gets to see them. So I would hope that perhaps there is at least one kind of massive gala where everybody can wear tiaras. That did happen in the Netherlands. That did happen again in Spain and Belgium. Those were, again, very much smaller affairs, very much like, okay, we need to transition power because the king, we can't do the king. So let's just get the next in line up there. And so it was just kind of interesting to see that. And because I think even when it comes to the coronation, I don't know if we'll see Camilla in a crown or not, or if she'll just wear a tiara. That is the great question, I think. Will she wear the crown that, Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, wore, or will she not just wear a tiara instead? So I think, again, we will have to wait and see exactly how everything shakes out. But it is called Operation Golden Orb. And it's kind of expected, or kind of guesstimated, that it will happen perhaps sometime next year. So we won't have as much of a long kind of planning period for it, kind of like the Queen Elizabeth. She became queen in 1952 in February, and then she wasn't coronated until June of 1953. So I think what will happen with Charles, though, is that there's a lot of talk that he will actually be coronated on the 70th anniversary of his mother's coronation. I think that timing is just perfect. I'm kind of hoping that is when it happens. That would be June 2nd. I actually already have my hotel reserved in the UK at that time, in anticipation that that will happen. Whether or not it does is still a bit of a mystery. I'll give you that. But I don't want to miss out. So I went ahead and made my hotel reservation. Again, all depends. It could fall apart. It could be then. I just kind of booked it in advance so I can cancel if I need to. Next is the homes. What happens with all these royal palaces and Balmoral and Sandringham, which Charles has both now inherited. Those are the only two private homes that are owned by Her Majesty the Queen. Charles also has his own home, Highgrove. Camilla actually has her own home as well that she has purchased and still owns. And so it'll just be interesting to see how everybody kind of moves. So, for example, Prince Andrew is currently in the Royal Lodge, which is one of the grander homes that is within kind of the sovereign system. So it could be asked that he kind of vacates that home, because obviously Andrew has fallen into scandal. He could be allowed to retire there, or he could be said, why don't you move over to Adelaide Cottage, which is smaller, because again, kind of those grander homes just cost more upkeep. And the question is as well, how much money does Andrew have? Because he was probably supported by the Queen. I would guess he probably got perhaps more inheritance than some of his siblings, because he really doesn't have many job prospects. So how does he support himself? It's a bit of a mystery. So I imagine, though, he has some money, but the question is quite how much, because again, those homes usually, although some of the upkeep is paid for by the sovereign grant, not all of it is. So he will be responsible for some of that as well. And so again, it'll remain to be seen. Bagshot House, which is where Sophie and Edward live, I imagine they'll still continue to live there. They're still working royals. Anne has her own home that she owns. So again, that'll stay with her. I think the big thing in terms of moving is Catherine and William, the Prince and Princess of Wales. They are reportedly going to be moving to Windsor Castle. So they had just moved into Adelaide Cottage before the Queen died, just moved in. So they've been there maybe at the most a month or a couple of weeks. And obviously, it's a big thing to move them. They kind of wanted out of the fish bubble of Kensington Palace, which I kind of understand. So if you've never been to Kensington Palace before, it had been a while since I've been there, but I went there actually after the Trooping the Colour for the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. And it was a bank holiday, so obviously a lot of people were out, but it is a packed park, and it is a working museum as well. So to a certain extent, the family has to be very careful about, when, the kids are out playing, they have a much smaller room to play. Whereas I think, Windsor backs up to the Windsor Park. And so there's a whole bunch of land that is mostly closed to the public that is open from time to time, where Catherine and William can allow their kids to really grow up outdoors, because that's very, very important to them. It's also close to their school. The thing with Adelaide Cottage is that it is rather small, so it only has 4 bedrooms. So basically all the Cambridges. So Catherine and William obviously have a room. The 3 kids have a room. So they don't have, a ton of space, probably more space than most people have for sure. And it's apparently quite a cute little place. But the question is, when would they move? Because obviously they just transitioned the kids to the new home. They just lost their great grandmother. They'll have to transition again. So it'll be interesting to see how long it takes them to move that, or if they decide they just want to stay in Adelaide Cottage. However, I think it's very much been anticipated that Catherine and William were always planning on moving eventually into Windsor. The Queen's death was actually rather unexpected. So they will have to move quicker than they anticipated. So I imagine within the couple months to a year, they will officially move into Windsor Castle and make that pretty much their permanent base of operations, while they will have still their offices there in Kensington Palace. And that'll be the place where they perhaps entertain dignitaries and those sorts of things, because now they are the Prince and Princess of Wales. I mean, it could be as well that perhaps they move to Clarence House or St. James's Palace. As I understand it, Clarence House William wasn't a big fan of it. Charles really likes Clarence House. That's where the Queen Mother used to live. So again, there could be some shuffling there, but I imagine it'll still be Kensington for Catherine and William, and it'll still be Windsor Castle for them as well. So it'll just be a question of when. And then there's obviously the question of what to do with the Frogmore Cottage, which Harry and Meghan are currently renting. Obviously, I think they have some sort of long-term agreement in place, as does Andrew. So kicking Andrew out is not necessarily perhaps an easy thing, although he may voluntarily do it. But when it comes to Harry and Meghan, a question is, again, how much are they going to be in the UK, if at all? And they spent all this money refurbing it, perhaps, Eugenie lived there for part of the time as well. And then we also had, perhaps Beatrice and her husband, Edo, want to live there. So it'll just be, there just may be some shuffling going on with that. Obviously, Harry and Meghan had that home for at least another year, but the palace as well is thinking, do we want the headache of Harry and Meghan there? It's a question. So there's 2 kind of problematic elements that's going to be kind of a thorn in the side for Charles's reign. One is Andrew and one is Harry and Meghan. Andrew, I think, is much easier to deal with because he is pretty much has been removed from public life. I think he wants back in, but he's been mostly removed. There's not a ton of interest in him coming back, if at all. So I think there is plenty of room for him to kind of be removed and for everybody to go, well, that's fine. But the question is, I think, too, when I look at him, is what is he going to do? He doesn't have a royal job anymore. He retired from the military. So, I mean, he still has his military pension. But what else is he gonna do? Because, I mean, the unfortunate thing is, and I do genuinely feel bad for him because he's never been convicted of a crime. So, I mean, he could have done absolutely everything that he's been accused of. But, again, right now it's just he said, she said. And he paid her off basically to avoid the constraints and the challenges of a trial. I think he paid her far too much. But he wanted to avoid that, to kind of help his mother. It was her platinum jubilee. His children would have probably been dragged into it. So there was reasons why he settled, and he had to sell his ski chateau, which apparently is also kind of been kind of a contentious deal. So it'll be a question of, what does Andrew do now? He could be kind of a kept man, and I think maybe that's what he'll end up being. So him and Fergie are still obviously very close, and she has just been able to purchase a $5 million flat in London because her books are doing well, and she's been able to actually kind of get herself a bit out of the financial hole she was in. So it's entirely possible that she and him actually perhaps even get married again, or just, cohabitate in, her house, and he helps support her because she helped support him because he helped support her for years and years. So again, it remains to be seen about Andrew. I think as long as he keeps his head down, he'll mostly be okay. But, it depends on, can he find something to do? And will his brother be okay with whatever he does? That's the real question. Now, Harry and Meghan are a huge problem because they're loose cannons. You just don't know what they're going to do. And they basically kind of created this conundrum where kind of nobody can trust them. And they're always kind of seemingly after, you know, their own kind of gain. So how does the monarchy address this? Because again, this issue is just one that's going to keep coming up and up and up, because nobody knows quite how to deal with Harry and Meghan. And at this point, you know, they still have their titles. They can't use their HRHs. They're demanding titles for their children. They still have Frogmore House. They're still dragging the monarchy into American politics. Like, they're just going to be a huge thorn in Charles's side. And I think the problem too is when it comes to Meghan, and I read this article in the American Spectator about it, and I think it's incredibly true, is that, because I even heard it when I was reading through Meghan's article in The Cut, is that she's kind of starting to sound a bit crazy and just delusional. Like, you know, she says, well, you know, everybody, you know, little girls still think of her as a princess, and, you know, she's a real life princess and everything. But it's not just that, it's that weird story about the Lion King that turned out not to be true. Her in the bouncy house with a 1-year-old was weird. And so there's just a lot of things of, when somebody's grasp on reality seems to be a bit sketchy, you just don't know what they're going to do. And Harry and Meghan had these very much delusions of grandeur. And I think as everybody else in the family is elevated, especially, you know, Harry and Meghan see their main rivals as Catherine and William. Catherine and William are now the Prince and Princess of Wales. They're closer than ever to the throne. And I think Harry and Meghan will become more and more desperate to try to steal the spotlight, which I think is just kind of bad news for everyone. So it'll be interesting to see how this all shakes out. But I anticipate we'll see more and more antics from Harry and Meghan because A, I just don't think they can help themselves. And B, I think, again, Harry and Meghan are desperate to recapture that royal magic, which has pretty much died for them at this point. Nobody is really amused by them anymore. Nobody is really all that interested anymore. I mean, they do have their fans. And, you know, some people in the American media are like, well, why does everybody hate them? It's like, we don't hate them, but they aren't following royal protocol, and they're making it more difficult for the real royals to operate, because Harry and Meghan are these rogue actors and they can't stand on their own 2 feet. They just have to constantly drag the monarchy into things because Harry and Meghan apparently have no talent on their own. That's not just me saying that, that's because they've kind of proven that, because it took dragging their feet and kind of twisting their arm to finally to get them to produce something for Spotify. They still haven't gotten anything to the table for Netflix yet, and that deal is 2 years old. It does not, and they're supposedly filming this reality TV series. It should not take you that long to film a reality TV series. They're literally filming your life. And obviously, the death of the Queen plays into it. We have Harry's memoir. We don't know what he's going to say. And so I think very much the future for the Sussexes is very much up in the air. And perhaps, you know, Charles tries to take a middle path for a while. But if Harry and Meghan make it too difficult, he will start probably the process or requesting to strip them of their titles, because at this point, Charles has waited so long to be king, he doesn't want anybody messing up his reign, even his own son. So we also have Anne and Edward. They will still continue to be working royals. We did actually see Anne out working today. And for Edward, I know specifically it's been long rumored and long talked about that Edward will get the title the Duke of Edinburgh. And it remains to see when that will happen. It will happen maybe perhaps next week, a couple weeks after the coronation. It's up in the air, but that's been very much something discussed and agreed to. And hopefully Charles will go ahead and do that. But Sophie and Anne at this point will remain, Sophie, Anne, and Edward will remain working royals. But the question is, and I think something Charles really has to consider is, so this is who he has as working royals. Himself and Camilla, who are both in their mid-70s. Anne, who's also in her 70s. Edward and Sophie, who are both in their late 50s, and then Catherine and William, who just turned 40. British monarchy is looking a little bit old there. Now, that's not totally unexpected, but I think they need a little bit of some younger blood, and so that's why I think it would have been nice if they had, even though Beatrice is not a working member of the royal family, that they had I still think they should probably try to get her in there, because I think they just need somebody a bit younger. Obviously, Beatrice is approaching 42, but that'll be 6 years away. And so I think they just need somebody a bit younger, because it's going to take them a good, perhaps 15 years before George becomes a working member of the royal family. That's a long time. And if people feel like they can't connect to the royals, that's going to become more problematic over time, because Charles, again, he is quite old, and Camilla is old. Anne is old, and granted, Anne is a workhorse. A lot of people obviously hugely respect Anne, and Sophie and Edward are fantastic, and Catherine and William will obviously be the stars as they grow older. The attention, of course, always tends to focus back down to the younger members of the family. So I think in this case too, and I think Charles is not thinking about, because he is head of state of so many different countries, when it comes to foreign and royal tours, they just don't even have as many members to tour anymore. So, obviously, Meghan and Harry would have been a huge part of this slimmed down monarchy, I have no doubt, and including Anne and Edward and Sophie. So, without Harry and Meghan, which I don't think added a ton, but they did add some appeal to younger people, because Meghan appeals to kind of the woke younger people, because, they can't, no offense to them, but they kind of didn't see the nuances of what was really going on behind the scenes. And so I think Charles is going to have to figure out if really the streamlined version he envisioned is going to work for the UK, which is different than the Netherlands, which really just has the Netherlands and a couple islands in the Caribbean, or Denmark, which has Denmark and Greenland, but Greenland is sparsely populated. He's head of state for not only the UK, which has about 60-70 million people, but Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. That's a lot of territory, that's a lot of ground. And what we will see as well is tours of these different territories coming soon. I think Catherine and William and their kids will go to Australia and New Zealand. I think that is a great trip for them. Charles is obviously, his first royal tour is going to France, and I think apparently Germany too, if I remember correctly. And it's a way for him, again, to connect with one of actually England's, to a certain extent, biggest adversaries and longest kind of, they've had kind of a, they've been allies too for decades as well. They kind of go backwards and forwards. But, for centuries, France and Britain were great rivals. And so I think it is for, the future of Europe, I think it's a good idea for Charles to visit, but he has a lot of other places to visit too. And he needs to connect them all under his reign, under his image. And I think Catherine and William can help. Obviously, Edward and Sophie and Anne can help. But most of the press attention will go to Catherine and William. And they don't really have anywhere else to focus the press attention on quite as much. That's why I think a younger member of the family like Beatrice could be a great addition. Just because it gives them that little bit of extra, something that I think they might need. Jewelry. I'm really excited. Let's talk about jewelry. So the Queen has the best royal collection of jewelry, I think, of any country. I think the Netherlands has a fantastic collection as well, just not quite as large. I think Sweden would be in third place. But when it comes to the amount of diamonds and jewelry and just immense collection of tiaras and pieces that the Queen has, I think really nothing competes. This goes back to Queen Mary. So this is the Queen's grandmother. She collected and was able to put together probably the best collection in all of Europe. And not to mention the fact she had fantastic taste in jewelry and tiaras. The Queen, not so much. She dismantled this really pretty piece that she got for her coronation into something that was a little bit more ugly. I would have preferred the original flower motif, and she went with something a little different. But when we look at all this, the question is who gets what, and how is this whole tiara thing change? So to give you an idea, most of Europe, especially Sweden's I think the greatest example. There's obviously the Queen, Sylvia. She has two daughters, Crown Princess Victoria and Princess Madeline, and she has a daughter-in-law, Princess Sophia. And the King has 4 sisters. So there's a lot of tiara sharing that goes on in the family. They exchange them quite a bit. Now there's some that are particularly for individual members. Obviously they call, us in the royal circles, we call them the big guns. So these are the tiaras are basically exclusively for the monarch or the consort. They're big. They're the biggest of the big. And so the Queen, there's really 3 of those in the Swedish monarchy, but basically all the other ones are shared. So obviously there is one that's kind of designated for the Crown Princess. And so it's the fringe tiara, is it the batten fringe? It's the fringe tiara that Victoria often wears. So that's kind of sort of reserved in the system for the Crown Princess, but other members of the family, really one of the King's sisters, I've seen her wear it. I think maybe the Queen's worn it too, but it's pretty much exclusively for Victoria's use. Sophia got a tiara when she married into the royal family, and Madeline was gifted the modern fringe tiara that her mother had. And so they have kind of individual tiaras, but oftentimes too, they mix them up. There's, the 4 buttons, there's the 6 buttons, there's the aquamarine one that came back into the family, there's the amethyst tiara. They have the steel cut, the Napoleonic steel cut tiara. They have the cameo tiara. Now, granted, the cameo, again, is kind of mainly reserved for Sylvia, but a lot of the other tiaras, they just kind of switch them out quite a bit, and they share a lot of jewelry, and they kind of mix it up. The Netherlands is kind of the same, although I think we'll see more sharing here in the future. There will perhaps be 1 or 2 that the heir, so Catherine Amelia, can say, well, I want these 2 to wear. And my sisters, because she has 2 sisters, can pick from the rest of these. So I think that might happen as well. And obviously there's still the big guns that are reserved just exclusively for the Queen, and perhaps Catherine Amelia can wear some of those as well. But we'll see a lot of mixing and a lot of change up of the jewelry. Her Majesty was very traditional in her jewelry, and she was also just, I don't think, very, very creative when it came to how to use these certain pieces. So for example, Princess Madeleine, in Sweden, they have it's an amethyst, but it's basically a coronet. So instead of having a tiara, so it goes down like this, it actually is a full circle. So there's not really a ton of easy ways to wear it, but she actually picked the perfect way to wear it, where it's kind of modern and not just kind of awkwardly placed. Because most of the time, I'm sorry to say, but it looks awkward. So what she did is she actually kind of tilted it back, so it kind of had that typical tiara shape, and then she pulled the chunk of her top of her hair through it. And so it kind of looked like a normal tiara, even though her hair was hiding half of it in the back. So I think that was kind of a unique and interesting way to use a piece that's difficult to wear, but giving it kind of a modern twist and being able to actually wear it effectively. So I think we'll see, I'm hoping at least, I don't think that Camilla will perhaps, she'll kind of reserve and not wear, I don't think, a ton of the pieces most associated with the Queen for a while. But I'm hoping we see between her and Catherine some more playing with the jewelry rather than just wearing, the individual pieces. How can you take, a bit of this piece and make it a hair barrette? How can you take a bit of this piece and, make earrings out of it, make a brooch? Like, how can you be more creative with what you have? That's what I'm hoping we see from the royal ladies. Because again, Queen E, she loved to wear the jewelry. She wore it well, but she wasn't all that creative when it came to exploring how to use it in unique and interesting ways. So I'm hoping we see more of that from Catherine and Camilla. And speaking of Catherine, so what happens with the Waleses? So Catherine and William have very much now been elevated to the top of the rung, and they will now have a lot more both authority, influence, and they'll be expected to do a lot more than they've been able to do. They've really, again, I've said this before, been able to have kind of this nice slow introduction to royal duties and working as full-time members of the royal family. And I mean, a lot of this has been taken up with raising their children, but I think they also had a first couple quiet years of their marriage without this massive pressure of being the heir and having to work so much. But that's now all changed. They will be required, especially because Charles is older. There's only probably so many more years. By the time he hits 80, he's probably not going to be doing a lot of foreign royal tours. So most of that burden will fall on Catherine and William. And so they will be doing a lot of tours. They will be doing a lot of work. They'll be inheriting a lot of patronages, I'm sure, from Her Majesty, and there will be just a lot more required of them. And so we will see them a lot more often than we've been used to, I think. At least I hope, because they do, even though I super admire their dedication to making sure they're there for their children and everything, if they want to reign, they can't just take it easy. They have to be there. And they can't just, not attend diplomatic receptions and stuff like that. I mean, they've been attending those more even before Her Majesty died, but now it's do or die. They really need to do that a lot more. They need to go on kind of these big, more important royal tours and do a lot more of these official duties. And that'll be, I'm sure, tough, because you want to be there with your kids. Your kids are growing up, but that's why they have Nanny Maria. That's why they're close to Catherine's parents. And so I think it'll be a struggle for them, but I think we'll see them a lot more, and I think we'll see them really having these kind of these huge and very important engagements that they're doing. Finally, I know I covered this a bit, but I think it's still worth questioning, what is the future with the Commonwealth? I mean, because obviously at the end of the day, although it is a collection of the former colonies of the United Kingdom who kind of buy into the Commonwealth system, it's more about the economic economic deals that they get rather than them, recognizing the monarchy or something like that. They want the economic deals so that they can more easily trade with the UK and other Commonwealth nations. So I think that will mostly remain the same. There may be some hiccups, but if you are South Africa and you want to easily trade with the UK, you join the Commonwealth because you can, and that's really, really helpful. So I don't think that will change quite as much, but I think the bigger thing is where Charles is head of state, especially Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. Obviously, there's a big Republican movement in Australia. I haven't heard as much of one in Canada, although I'm sure it's there, and New Zealand as well, because those are kind of the big three. And the question is, do they continue with Charles as head of state, especially because he's older, he can't get out there quite as much, or do they go ahead and say, well, we'll still be part of the Commonwealth, but you know what? Our president will be head of state now. We don't want Charles's face on some of our currency. So that will remain to be seen, I think, and that will be kind of a huge, both kind of blow to the monarchy if, Canada does decide to become a republic, or Australia. But I think it's also where the future is going to. So I think, William said it, I believe, when he was in Jamaica, it's like, hey, if you guys want to have your own head of state, we're not going to stand in your way. But I think there is kind of a benefit to having a monarch as head of state, because you do have that continuity and you do have kind of those benefits. But the real benefit is the Commonwealth and the economic undertones of it that make it easier for trading. So I think that's where a lot of people will put in their time and energy and effort, is to preserving the Commonwealth and preserving the ability of their country to trade with the UK and others. So guys, let me know what you think. What do you think the future holds for the British monarchy? Again, I love monarchies. I love tiaras. I just want to see them in a museum, although that is cool. I want to see them being worn. So I'm looking forward to seeing the monarchy continue. And I think, again, they have this great way, because, obviously politicians are mired in politics. What royals can do, though, is they can reach out to the everyday person in a way that most politicians can't and don't have time for. So I really hope that the British monarchy, I have no doubt it will continue in the UK. I think the question is beyond, and how does Charles change up the monarchy to kind of fit the modern ideals without going so far that people wonder, well, why do we have this in the first place? So guys, let me know what you think. What tiara? And now I'm planning on doing my favorite tiara video for my fashion channel, because I'll start doing Tiara Tuesdays again. And I'll have my best ones from the British collection, my best ones overall, Dutch, everything like that. But what are you looking forward to seeing Catherine wear? I really hope, now there's been rumors that came out of the vault. I just don't entirely buy it, because I don't see how the tiara got from point A to point B, because it doesn't make a ton of sense. But will we see the Strathmore Rose tiara finally being worn? That is my question, because I'd love to see that piece, because it looks so pretty, but apparently it's too delicate to be worn. But maybe, just maybe, they'll figure out something to do with it. Perhaps that'll be the first one Charlotte wears. Wouldn't that be cool? Although for her wedding, she should wear the Queen Mary fringe tiara, because the firstborn blood princess of each generation has worn that. So that includes Her Majesty, Princess Anne, Princess Beatrice, and the next should be Princess Charlotte. So guys, thank you so much again for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again really, really soon. Bye.